Today is the day many felt like would never come. Sarah Boone opening statements. But it never is that easy because before the opening statements, we have to deal with evidence issues in a Richardson hearing. And after the opening statements, of course, we have witnesses. Now, this video is just going to be covering up until the lunch break for two reasons. This is already probably going to be longer than I would like, but there is a lot of information that needs to be covered. Also, there's a lot of audio issues in the first half that seem to be resolved now. So if you are someone who couldn't listen and you're trying to catch up, maybe this will help. If you're someone who can only watch half of the presentation today in the court, maybe this will help. I do plan to do the other half later, so subscribe and check out for that video. Now, with that being said, if you are new to Sarah Boone entirely, you don't know what's going on in this case, I do have a playlist called Sarah Boone Letters, and that should get you up to speed. Now, first thing I see when I tune into a live stream is Sarah Boone smiling and waving as she waited for things to start today. Someone in the crowd, I assume. Before opening statements, there's some evidence issues to cover. The defense sent the state 119 images that did not match the 81 pages of PDFs the state previously received. We went over this yesterday as well in court. They need to cut it down to just the things pertaining to anxiety, according to the judge. Sarah Boone's lawyer spoke away from the mic, hard to read, 15 images left. State responded that of the 15 images, 2 are health information sharing sheet, which they don't understand the relevance. Her initial assessment in the documents isn't being objected to, but the bottom image includes some toxicology report, and they haven't said they want to use it without the rest of toxicology screening. There are relevancy issues. In her toxicology screening, though, when it comes to treatment for depression, C is at 1.65 blood alcohol. The judge asked if incomplete document issue. The state says yes. The test of the toxicology not included. No complaint. Page narrative in the documents that the state doesn't object to. They don't object to the vital signs. They don't object to the initial assessment. State says Sarah Boone's team gave them pages 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, skipped 48, but then included 49. Page 48 includes her height and weight. They aren't objecting to anything else. And then we begin what is officially the Richardson hearing at this point, I believe. If you didn't watch yesterday, this is about those images we just discussed. The state was previously sent a PDF, and at the last minute, they were also sent images that should have been of the same information, the same documents, but according to the state, there are differences. Now, the first thing is the judge asks when the defense sent those documents out. So when did the defense send these documents to the state? The defense lawyer, Owens, says he didn't know that would be asked. That shouldn't be true, as the judge asked the same question of him yesterday and he couldn't answer. The defense says they got the items last week and didn't get sent to yesterday or the day before where they realized it wasn't disclosed. The defense says the PDF was from a previous lawyer and had notes on them. The defense wanted a complete version from the hospital, and their error was simply not sending it to them until yesterday morning. The state hands over the original 81 pages of State's 1. The state says there are no markings on it. The state says the JPEGs are more difficult to search because they aren't in order or searchable like a PDF. They also previously yesterday said some of them are like upside down and turned. It's a problem. The state says as far as they can tell, page 68 from the original 81 pages isn't there. Page 68 is interesting because Sarah Boone denies alcohol use and tobacco use, and it isn't in the images. And the state wants the ability to keep looking for it. Now, if this is all pertaining to depression and anxiety diagnoses, that's a big deal. If Sarah Boone is saying in some of these meetings, she's saying, I don't use alcohol, but I'm depressed, when alcohol is a depressant. That's kind of a big deal, I would think. The defense said they will provide a printed copy, but they wanted to get it this morning at a location that was closed, the Federal Express. It was closed due to road. Violation was found to be inadvertent, but the violation had some sustainability to it. Limited effect on the state's ability to prepare for trial, other than the page they're seeking to address. State's address is that the page. Let me here. State's addresses at the page defense wants included will be included. If the state can find the document, the original 81, they can ask for it to be included at the time. So basically, the ruling is that these new documents will be in. And if the state can find that 68 page about her saying she doesn't use alcohol or tobacco, that can also be used. Now, here's where things get hairy again. It's Sarah Boone, right? And if you don't understand with Sarah Boone, if you're new, everything is going to go wrong that can go wrong. Things are going to get real fucky. There's no other way to describe it. The state informs the court that the defense plans to use demonstrative aids that include jury instructions that may not be given in photographs that may be brought into evidence, but they haven't seen some of them. The state wants a discussion on each in lettered so they can be referred to, urges the court to not allow evidence in an opening statement. The state says extremely prejudicial since the state still does not believe there's an overt act in Sarah Boone's battered spouse defense. Defense responds, defense is self-defense. Owens walks up, and you can't really hear him. That trend will continue. The judge asks, why are we discussing law in an opening statement? Owens says he agrees with the state attorney and holds up an exhibit, but we can't see it. It's just white on the back because of our angle. We'll get some clarity later, don't worry. The judge says that doesn't answer my question. Owens shows more of them away from the microphone, and the judge just asks for the state's response on those two. The state says opening statements, we should be discussing what we expect to come in during a trial, and that is enough of a minefield without discussing law. Jury instructions have not been decided upon, and they can use any means in closing, so demonstrative aids should be used at the end. We may need to read 3/4 of the jury instructions before closing remarks. Owens says he has used boards like these countless times for 30 years. Judge asks state if those are standard instructions, and he says he hasn't pulled it up. So he says from memory, he didn't think that was the complete reasonable doubt instruction, and he knows that isn't the full the full one instruction, and the one instruction he says isn't there in full, and one he knows isn't there in full. I put a reasonable doubt twice. That's wrong. There's two different instructions. You'll get to know what they are in a minute. At this point, I assume the blank boards he was holding, and I can't see, are jury instructions. The state says each is an entire page, and that obviously wouldn't fit on there. Judge asks to see the instructions, and right off the bat, the first one he looks at has the wrong instructions printed on it as it was revised earlier that year. Reasonable doubt instruction is not what was read to the jury. The judge doesn't allow it. So one of the boards was reasonable doubt. It can't be allowed to the jury. It's not what was read to the jury. It's the wrong instruction. Sarah Boone's lawyer had the wrong jury instruction printed out for trial. He brings up the second instruction. The judge says it's portions of that instruction and asks state for a response. So we don't get to hear what that one is, I don't believe. The state says you shouldn't be showing select highlighted portions. Show them to the end with the jury instructions. The judge then asks for the photos. I'm doing my best to see them when flipped around. One looks the side of Sarah Boone's head. Another appears to be her sitting down. Again, defense is speaking away from the microphone. Owen said he sent something to the judge, but the judge hasn't received it. The state seems to have received the email, and the judge seemed to be provided something by the clerk. Owen said other courts have allowed demonstrative aids. First he mentioned was in closing statements. It was a map. 2018 Supreme Court says it was okay for a state to use a mannequin to show the gunshot wounds happened. I don't remember if that was state or country Supreme Court. Self-defense is the defense. They are allowed to show previous injuries. More defense talking off the mic, saying it is reasonable. Back on the mic says there are demonstrative aids to give circumstances. The state is asking, as a matter of principle, to not allow exhibits during opening statements. You could theoretically allow gruesome autopsy photos, but those are all coming. Specific objects are to a bloody ear from a prior incident. That was from body-worn camera, not from her phone. Law of cases, they can't put on reputation evidence until self-defense is established. It is to come from the defendant. Sarah's recent statement, self-defense argument doesn't exist. So the state is again saying, so far, Sarah Boone has never given an actual self-defense argument. The problem for the state side is that there's no appeal. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, this is a 1,000-word error that can't be removed from the jury's mind. The state argues a photo of Sarah with her dogs on the porch isn't relevant or entered into evidence at all. The rest of the photos they are willing to introduce, those as evidence themselves, if Sarah Boone makes a self-defense statement. Blow them up at the end of trial, but it's dangerous to let them do this, and the state doesn't believe these will come into evidence. So the state's again repeating, this isn't even going to be relevant. You're not going to let them do battered spouse. Defense says the judge already ruled these will come in. The judge quickly corrects him. He ruled they could mention it in the opening statement, but these photos are, and I want to quote, a totally different kitty. I got to chuckle. I need a chuckle when I can get it in this case. The defense says these come in for self-defense, nothing about battered spouse, but the judge says the overt act remains. The defense says they expect there to be an overt act. The defense said the photo of the dogs was gotten from the state and it's on the evidence list, and George abused the dogs too. Judge's ruling. The instructions are denied. The photos are denied. They can talk about what is in the photos but can't show them. The defense says they plan to play it. The defense says they plan to play a 2-minute suitcase video to the jury in the opening statement. They want to play the suitcase video in the opening statement, and I am just shocked. That is the most damning piece of evidence against your client. Maybe their mind, it's like, if we're the ones to present it, it'll like downplay it. I don't know. I don't know what the thought process here. The state just says for the judge to use his discretion. They're going to hear it in the next 2 days. The video isn't allowed. The judge didn't allow it. The jury's brought in. Some read in the elevator with lawyers, but didn't have an issue. There's no good audio for the opening statements. They didn't mic them up. I'm going to do the best I can. Give me 1 second. I am going to cough, and I don't want to cut it. Okay. State first. Defendant shut George Torres in a suitcase. He weighed 103 pounds. She did this with malicious intent and left him to take his final breaths on this earth alone. At least 15 minutes. George Torres, due to this defendant's judgment and conscious disregard for another. Suddenly, the audio is good again because he walked up to the stand as Mike. The defense narrates what was said to George Torres, George begging for help with Sarah Boone laughing and taunting him. I read through this exact same thing yesterday. I didn't read it. We listened to it yesterday. So if you listen to that and you go, I really hope he reads that, he is. George Torres saying he can't breathe. And the last thing Sarah does is haunt him, basically. Another video of Sarah Boone zooming in on the suitcase and him one last time saying Sarah. And this time he walks away from the microphone, so it's hard to hear. How do we get to the point where 103-pound George Torres was left to die in a suitcase? Sarah wakes up several hours later and comes downstairs. First thing he does, as you will hear, is take his little legs out. So he says, make sure it's clear, Sarah says little legs. I'm sorry if any of this is the wrong audio is rough. I switched to an audio boosted source at this point. I literally couldn't hear. Sarah says she tried to resuscitate him. Next thing is she doesn't make a 911 call. She calls Brian Boone, her ex-husband. They share a child. It's a Monday, a normal work day, a school day for the child. The arrangement is every other weekend they co-parent. Monday through Wednesday, the child was her responsibility. Brian had actually been trying to contact Sarah because he wanted to know if she would get her child that day. There was a reliability issue. You will see in the phone record, he calls her and calls her and calls her. And then you will see she calls him instead of 911. He comes over, doesn't live far away. Brian Boone peeks into the front door with blue legs sticking out. You need to call 911 and doesn't take a foot inside. He waits outside, being the good co-parent that he is. So after calling Brian Boone and him coming over, she calls 911. What you will not hear are tears, sorrow. You will hear a level of concern. She quotes Sarah about them playing. He quotes Sarah. Hide and seek kind of thing. Blood coming out of his mouth. I don't know if it was an aneurysm. She went to sleep. This took place late. He's cold and stiff. She fell asleep while trying to play hide and seek. She mentions blood coming out of his mouth. What the doctor found at autopsy was that he passed from positional asphyxiation and environmental suffocation. She also noticed blunt force trauma on his torso, on his face, his mouth. She will use words like contusions and hematomas. Sheriff's office shows up. More of what you heard on the 911 call. It was good. I fell asleep. I don't know what happened. A few hours later, detectives approach her. Did a variety of things, such as getting her cell phone. They do the first interview with the defendant. The basics are the same. A little more information. They are detectives. The basics are we had wine, painted, drew, Chardonnay from the Woodridge Winery. I'll never be able to forget the Woodridge Winery by the end of this. The bottles, plural, are in the trash, listening to music, enjoying each other's company. Her description is a bottle of wine and some more left over. Not all bottles of wine are the same. You might envision a 750. A bottle of wine you might see at a restaurant. These bottles were $1,500. Double. There are receipts. February 22nd, there is a receipt for Woodridge wine. February 23rd, 11:17 p.m., another receipt for Woodridge Chardonnay wine. Again on the 23rd, 5:30 p.m. Another receipt for the same bottle of wine. These bottles will be produced to you in evidence, and they are magnum bottles of wine. That's the wording there. 1.5 liters consumed by a 103-pound man and the defendant. And they're both about the same weight. So 103-pound people, around 100-pound people, drinking 1.5 liters. If you believe that they would consume leftover wine, that includes any leftovers from Saturday. That's a lot of wine. She said they were playing and left enough room for, in her words, his little fingers to get out. A good time. George Torres is stressing out over jobs and money, dancing with dogs and playing. When playing hide and seek, she went into the shower, got tired of waiting, went to go down to see him playing with a suitcase. She zipped him up. 2 fingers could stick out. She went upstairs. She thought they'll have sex and call it a day. It was a good day. They had wine, but they weren't drunk. You can assess that for yourself from the recordings. No ill will between them. Last argument, maybe last week, was used, and they used to be able to afford liquor, but they can't do that anymore. Now they afford wine. When they go through the phone, that's when they discover the videos and other things that will be discussed with you in a bit. They give another interview on the 25th. She describes last instance of violence, and you will hear that George Torres hit her with a curtain rod a month ago. But it has been good. Most of the time, she'll flee and go over to Brian Boone's. She doesn't want to drink. She drinks to placate him. She says you will see videos of George Torres smashing her TV a month earlier. You might see that too. When she drinks, she doesn't get drunk. She likes to be non-compos mentis. Her words, not mine. The prosecutor wants to be very clear. Sarah Boone is using that phrase. Wants to have her wits about her. That they played hide and seek 3 times before, but never zipped up each other before. They are running out of places to hide. It's a small apartment. She doesn't remember any of the videos taken that night, and asks if she wants to see them. She says, I can't see this. She says she flipped it over, but it didn't do anything intentional. Discussed if it was his fingers that could get out. She didn't mean to leave him in. Both of them got in there. The plan wasn't to leave him in the suitcase. Why is this going on? It's the drinking. The suitcase thing never happened before, though. She described it happened before. It was hard to understand, but it really sounded like, because this was the audio issues, right? It sounded like the prosecution was saying Sarah said suitcase thing never happened, although she also said it happened before. Like he was saying that she admits it at some point. As again, I'm sorry, audio is bad. Sarah says I'll never drink again. She insists she has injuries on her, but you don't take her word for it because they took photos of her showing no injuries. She was asked about saying fuck you to George. She said it was playing. Everyone's having a good time. I didn't touch him. He didn't touch me. Her words. What else was found on the phone? A conversation between George Torres' brother and the phone. You don't know who's using the phone at the time, but you can infer. The owner of the phone is Miss Boone. My brother told me what you did, Sarah. I don't want you around any of my nieces or nephews. Christmas 2019. Ugh. Your dad hit me in the face. Next text is, hide and seek I shall. January 13th, another heated discussion. She describes it in a text to Mo. It's a Torres thing. Boo. Keep the fugly creep out too. It's fugly. The brother says, please do something with yourself, Sarah. God bless you. Sarah replies, and bless you, all of you too, in all capitals, rid of him, then it will be, and in all capitals, better, Torres. That is the case. That is what the evidence will show. We in the state of Florida and members of the jury are going to come to a door that says danger, keep out, stay away by court order. It said defendant has history with the victim. A door we may not enter without permission. I anticipate during the trial we'll be invited in, and as we come inside of this door at her beckoning, we will have things pointed out she would like you to see. The first night she met George Torres, he smashed her phone, punched her in the face, and made her curl up on the porch until he fell asleep. You will hear George Torres was an alcoholic. His high score was a 3.42 when treated at the hospital. This is a man with serious alcohol problems, and I expect you'll hear that too. Despite that first date, despite not having a relationship or emotional ties, things that make it harder to leave. It's one thing to have a bad date, another thing to leave a 25-year marriage. Second and third date were at bars. Nothing wrong with that. I ask a guy for a cigarette, and she says George Torres freaks out. You will hear about injuries he might have caused: blackouts, cut to face, bloody ear, stab wound on the leg, perhaps described as sword fighting and playing around. If this comes in, the state will get to take the lead of the tour, and we're not going to go into that now. If this all comes in, we will discuss it, and then ask you to not rush to judgment, and then apply if these past incidents have anything to do with what happened in this case. You may hear from experts about battered spouse syndrome. The state isn't arguing that battered spouse syndrome exists, but if there is testimony, we ask that you keep in mind this is not an actual diagnosis in the Bible. They use, as in the mental health system, the DSM-5-TR. It's kind of like a component of PTSD, but it isn't actually in the book. It is in the book. There might be some disagreement on what makes it up, but it is important to understand control, isolation, psychological violence, physical violence, sexual violence. We expect Sarah to mention that can be happening. That can be in some relationships. If there's a defense instruction, this is to help you know what a reasonable person in these circumstances might do. Years ago, you would say you wouldn't leave. The expert might explain it to people. But turning to the facts of our case, would an ordinary, objective, reasonable person do this? I think that is what is basically said. Even boosted, it's very quiet. You can't take a home inspection from the person trying to sell you the house. You have to take credibility of the people providing the story into account. After you hear all the evidence of this case, from the horse's mouth, from the videos where you trust your eyes, your ears, the state believes you are going to return a verdict of second-degree murder. The defendant killed Mr. Torres because she believed he deserved it, not because a reasonable person in her position needed to. So that's the state's opening statement. What do I think? I think it was way too long-winded. I thought the parts where they were reading out were good because I could hear them, but the jury could hear them when they speak the other parts, and that, I don't know. It felt like some of the analogies didn't sound great. Kind of long-winded. I mean, I think it got the point across. I'm just not sure it was the best opener they could have possibly done. But now Owens is up. And as before, audio issues in court. And I'm using multiple streams, finding the best audio to try to get this down. Sarah Boone and George Torres were down and out. Both of them suffered from alcohol abuse, and as you can imagine, it affected keeping and getting a job. They were coke dependent, and with that was domestic violence. George Torres physically abused Sarah Boone. Sarah suffered from psychological effects. There were several prior incidents where police were called and took photos. You're going to be able to see the evidence. We expect the court will instruct you at the end, while you're considering self-defense, you can consider previous acts. Her decision to use reasonable force. Keep in mind, weigh all the evidence and credibility of the witnesses. Evidence will show they purchased wine the day before and left the extra in the fridge. Both went to Publix and came out with a larger bottle of wine. An obvious attraction is between the two. George was very jealous of Sarah. He can be charming, but when his level of intoxication gets high, forcible sex with Sarah Boone or physical violence happens sometimes. They brought the wine. A simple life. They don't have much money. They like puzzles. And did some. George took Sarah's keys and debit card. George went to Publix and got another bottle of wine. Sarah thought he was just walking to a closed store for cigarettes. When he comes in with a second bottle, Sarah knows this isn't good and tries to keep him in a good mood. She drinks some wine and they get intoxicated. They get silly when drunk and play hide and seek. She gets cold and tired waiting in the shower, so she goes downstairs. A big suitcase is downstairs. They are malnourished. They don't eat good. The pulling part of the suitcase is broken. The he tries to describe it. That little part, the zipper part, like this on this hoodie, that's broken. So they use a rubberized I can't think what it's called. I didn't write it in my notes. My brain's thinking like a paper clip to do it. All right, he's in the suitcase. She zips him up. They laugh for a while. At some point, he says, "I can't breathe." His face is to the zipper, and his face is towards the opening. He is a captive audience. I think that's what he said. Really hard to hear. I think that's what he said, and then it kind of sounds like it matches what he said after, which is more clear. Physically the same size, but he is stronger. In 100 fist fights, he would win 100 times. But she has him down. He has to sit and listen. It's a unique form of physical restraint, and says things she shouldn't say. You will see in the video she taped it. 11 minutes later, the suitcase is right side up for him to get out. You hear him say, "Sarah." The key is what happened in those 11 minutes. Sarah Boone will take the stand to explain what happened and why it happened. The evidence will show she was justified in her actions to prevent an attack from George Torres, which the law says everyone has a right to self-defense. The medical examiner will tell you about bruising. He was in the suitcase for a while, but Sarah will explain that, why that happened, involving the bat her son, who stays with them, owns. In there, he has a bat. The same bat George Torres threatened Sarah with by swinging the bat at the TV. There's a video. Sarah loved him. You will hear why women don't leave. You will hear about Sarah Boone and her mental health struggles. She had no intent to kill him. The prosecutor mentioned she wanted him to die. Couldn't be farther from the truth. She loved the man. She hated the abuse. He kept coming back. She was weak and vulnerable. You will hear it all. You have to take it all into account and understand what happened for the circumstance involving this tumultuous relationship. Sarah isn't perfect. As many of us do, when drunk too much, we sleep in. She goes downstairs looking for George. Thought he was on the computer looking for a job. Checks outside to see he's smoking a cigarette, and she sees a suitcase. Gets him out. He's purple. Tries CPR. Calls her ex-husband. He's the only family she has. All she knows to do. She was a sheltered daughter. Smart, but not worldly. Asked Brian to come over. He's 5 minutes away, and she called again in that time, and he was on his way. Brian sees the body and says, "Call 911," and she does. Police arrive. You'll see the cameras. Sarah was freaking out, thinking and somehow responsible. She gives a statement to Deputy Rodriguez, and homicide detectives get a statement of Sarah in an unmarked squad car. They take Sarah's phone. They have signed consent. They do a phone extraction. Sarah doesn't remember making the videos. She makes no attempt to do anything other than, here's the phone. I think they're basically saying that Sarah didn't try to hide anything. They told her she'll get the phone tomorrow. Had a conversation with a female detective who was pregnant. Not feeling good. Can you come to the sheriff's department? Sarah says that's why she went to the sheriff's department. I do want to mention here, we've been through this, and the judge found her not reputable for this story, so I don't know how well that'll play with the jury. But it was an interrogation she showed up to. They were going to arrest her either way. That was already made up. 2-hour videotaped interrogation, trying to get a confession of murder, but it didn't happen. But Sarah lies. She's scared. You can tell you're trying to pin this on her, that it was intentional. It was not. She lies. She's not a lawyer. She doesn't know about self-defense. She doesn't understand she has a rightful right to defend herself. She doesn't understand she has a right to use the force she did. I wasn't there to advise her. No lawyer was, so she lied. So you have to balance that with her testifying for you. We ask you to look for evidence of cooperation with her testimony. Her testimony will be corroborated by evidence. The suitcase in this case was a physical restraint for the blocking of an attack, self-defense. Nonetheless, you will hear from police officers, maybe body cam footage, photos of injuries of Sarah Boone. Some images, Sarah Boone might look happy, but she's intoxicated and safe because the police are there. And he says, we have a packed courtroom, but the jury is the most important. And it has to be the case has to be decided fairly according to law. The jury must presume Sarah is innocent for the entire trial. She doesn't have to prove anything. That's why the state goes first. They have the burden of proof. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You are going to have doubts, but don't rush and keep an open mind. Two sides of this case. You can't form fixed opinions early on. It's hard to do. You're going to hear testimony that battered women's experiences affect their experience of imminent danger. Victims of extreme violence may fear death in situations others may not. After hearing both sides, we are confident you will have a reasonable doubt and believe you will find Sarah Boone not guilty because it is the right thing to do. And that's the opening statements. I did the best I could. I hope it was fine. The audio was so bad. Now, the problem with her entire defense for that opening, she didn't mean to kill him. But according to, from my understanding of the law, she has to admit she did mean to kill him for this defense to be a thing. Right? So I don't understand. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know. I do. I think Sarah's refusing to admit she killed him and saying, well, I don't really need to do that. Sarah Boone, I think, is doing that. That's my opinion. That's where I'm at with that. Now, I'm going to go into the witnesses next. Now, the witnesses, I'm going to preface this with I haven't gone through all the witnesses. The state hasn't mentioned this. It's a theory. It's a theory that people have had about the Sarah Boone case involving the stairs. I see a lot of comments involving the stairs, how they think Sarah might have done something involving stairs, and maybe that suitcase wasn't downstairs all along. Maybe that's not accurate. Oh boy, are you going to enjoy this witness testimony. I'm going to say that. I'm going to say it's going to be interesting. I want you to take note of when we get to the witnesses talking about what they heard that day. But first, and remember, during this time, the state goes first, defense follows. We have Juan Torres on the stand, one of 6 siblings. George Torres is his older brother. They are previously from Philadelphia. I don't know why Philadelphia is now like being used, like mentioned as if that's like a big deal, but it is. They spoke on a weekly basis. George was living with Sarah when he passed. Juan didn't get along with Sarah. He spoke on the phone with his brother on the day of his death. Wife and kids were present. The topic was just normal talking, checking on him. In the background, you could hear Sarah yelling. Something about choking or that he choked her, not sure. Conversation ended because of her yelling. Sarah sounded upset. Hadn't spoken to Sarah since. Cross-examination of Juan. He has 1 sister and 3 brothers local. George Torres never lived with Juan or his siblings. When George called, did you notice anything about his speech or his voice? Was he slurring his words? No. Do you believe he had been drinking? No. Do you, when you believe you heard Sarah, you knew her voice. How did you know it was Sarah you heard? He knew her voice. And she was saying, tell them about choking me. Yes. Did you hear your brother? What, is she talking? You ask your brother, what is she talking about? No. Did the statement she said surprise you? Not really. You heard it before? No. Did you think Sarah had been drinking from her voice? No. Did your brother hang up and you both say bye? Yes. Did your mother and father live in the area? Yes. Did George sometimes stay with them? Yes. Released subject to recall. Next is Devin Jambro. He is the assistant manager at Publix. They ask him to use scissors to open the contents of the package. States they're public receipts. They are made at the time of the transaction. Received into evidence without objection. He's handed a disc with his signature on it. He looked at it earlier. It's surveillance footage. The footage is kept. The witness says it's accurate. Moved into evidence without objection, and the witness is released. Joan Williams. She is a 911 taker. All phone lines are recorded. Calls are kept at the 911. Records are kept at the 911 calls. She recognizes the dish with her initials. She reviewed this disc previously. Additionally, accurately, and it's also the 911 call she took. Moved into evidence without objection, witness released. So these two are just like corroborating the evidence, right? This is from the Publix, this is from 911. We have Vincent Battaglia. I might be saying that wrong. He lived in the same apartments as Sarah Boone and George Torres for about a year. He went over to their house a couple times and even tuned a guitar for their child, for a child at least. Apartment walls are thin. He would hear arguing and yelling almost daily from their apartment. Sarah Boone approached him about what he had heard once while he was smoking cigarettes 4 or 5 months before January 2020. She said, if you hear anything, keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything. Finger over the lips. Don't report anything about fighting or anything you hear, and ask if he remembers anything from February 23rd, 2020. There was a loud noise, powerful enough to shake the wall. He could feel it as he was touching it, and his girlfriend on FaceTime asked what that was because she could hear it. He heard arguing that night, but not clear. He heard both voices back and forth. Last sound he heard was a loud banging sound that caused rumbling, and it sounded like it was falling from far away and getting closer to him. That sounds like stairs. That sounds like something coming downstairs. Heavy, right? Right? I'm not alone, right? Everyone agrees. But defense is going to cross him. Maybe they'll clear that up. He lived next to them for about a year. Was he aware police had been called? He started to say other people told him, but he got stopped. He said he never saw the police called when he was there. He worked odd hours and was doing schooling. Do you know they consumed alcohol? Yes. That they consumed alcohol to excess? Yes. He gave a recorded statement to the police. Yes. There was an overruled objection at this point by the state. He heard regular yelling at like 10:30 that night. Redirect from the state. On cross, he was asked about that arguing he heard. It was around 10:30. When did you hear the rumbling? The defense objects. Overruled. He said maybe about 11:15. Witness released. Defense wants subject to recall, and they approach. He's released, not subject to recall. Now we get Brandon Motes. He lived in an apartment next to Sarah Boone, and he had roommates. He was going to school, just a student, not working. He avoided Sarah and George as much as possible. His bedroom shared a wall to the staircase in their apartment, so he's right next to that staircase. Walls are thin. Arguments were so common, he started tuning them out. He heard arguing earlier in the evening. He was in his bedroom all night, and it's on the first floor. He heard loud crashing sound at 10:30, 11 p.m., somewhere around there. He heard something that sounded like it was falling down the stairs. It shook their rooms. He never saw her after that. Cross-examination. He tried to avoid Sarah and George. He didn't like drunk people, so he just tried to avoid them. One day, his roommate told him Sarah was asleep on the back porch, and he went and looked and saw it himself. He got locked out of his apartment one night, and Sarah came up and started talking to him. He got the vibe she didn't want to go home. That's when he heard the arguing. He said about 7:30, but he doesn't remember if it was back and forth. But he did hear a male and female voice, and they were loud. Witness released, subject to recall, lunch break. So it's early. It's early. But that is two witnesses on either side, both of her neighbors. One outright says something sounded like it fell down the steps. The other one seemed to insinuate something fell down the steps. There's been a theory that that suitcase didn't start downstairs, and that the injuries George got were partly because Sarah Boone shoved him down those steps. If that happened, that changes a lot. Now, I do wonder if there's evidence on the steps, because depending on like this, I would think a suitcase, I guess depending on how hard the material it's made of, would possibly leave identifying damage on stairs, and you'd be able to tell fresh damage from old due to like you know when you dent something, it's wooden, you get like dirt gets in the crevices, and you can tell a new, I don't know how to really describe it, you can tell when wood's got a new damage wound to it, right? So I wonder if there's more coming. And I also noticed that the defense really didn't have anything to like redirect away from the idea that she shoved him down the steps. I have to think the prosecution's going to go with that angle. I have to think it. When you got witnesses on either side suggesting it, right? I'd love to know what's going through the jury's head. And this is the lunch break. As I said, lunch break. This is only partway through. This is still a 38-minute video just covering so far. So what I'm going to do with this is I am probably going to get this on YouTube. I'm going to probably leave the comments, the chat open. I'll probably like kind of watch it. Probably not watch the video itself. Might not be active in chat, but I'm going to watch it. And because I get the feeling they're probably back from lunch already, and I'm going to want to catch that, right? I'm going to want to watch it. So I'll probably leave this here. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hopefully this helps some people out. I know the audio was bad today. I apologize for any names I said wrong or anything I misheard. It was rough. I did the best I could. I'm also extremely tired. I slept like 3 hours, but I couldn't help myself. I had to listen.